Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into something pretty challenging, right? This whole post-truth idea.
Yeah, it's definitely a major challenge. I mean, we're living in this environment where misinformation just seems to spread like wildfire.
Exactly. And basic facts, things we used to maybe take for granted, now they often feel like they're up for debate. It's unstable ground,
It really is. And so our mission today, it's ambitious, I'll admit, but it feels absolutely necessary.
which is
Well, when you've got this kind of chaos, politically, socially, even inside companies, how does a leader actually build trust? And maybe even more importantly, how do they maintain it?
maintain it when everyone seems to be questioning, well, everything.
Precisely. How do you lead effectively in that kind of environment?
Okay, so we've pulled together quite a stack of sources for this deep dive, and they're really diverse, aren't they?
They really are. We're going from, ancient Roman philosophy with Cicero, spiritual texts like the Bhagavad Gita.
All the way to modern military strategy. Think Clausewitz and McChrystal, and even insights from Pixar's creative process.
Yeah, Ed Catmull's work, it's a broad range. And the goal isn't just to, summarize them.
No, we want to dig deeper. We're trying to pull out some core actionable principles for leaders trying to navigate this specific post-truth challenge.
Right. We're focusing on three main levers based on what these sources suggest. First, personal character, specifically intellectual honesty.
Okay, the leader's own integrity.
Second, institutional transparency. How does the organization itself operate with candor?
Makes sense. From the individual to the system.
And third, the power of consistent, principled action, showing up day after day.
So character, transparency, consistency. We're essentially looking for the operating manual for leading when the ground feels like it's constantly shifting under your feet.
That's the idea. We want to give you the critical insights on why integrity actually matters more now, not less.
And why maybe the process of how you seek truth is becoming just as important as claiming you've found the truth.
Exactly. It's about that credibility in the process.
Yeah.
And also, why that steady, consistent effort, the small pushes, often beats those big, flashy, but ultimately sporadic initiatives.
All right, let's dive into that first pillar. The individual leader, their personal commitment to truth, to honesty. Where do we start?
Nassim Taleb gives us a really powerful starting point with this concept he calls doxastic commitment.
Doxastic commitment. Sounds a bit academic. What's the core idea?
It sounds complex, but it boils down to something really visceral. It means having beliefs that are strong enough, that you're convicted enough about them, that you're willing to take actual personal risk for them.
Okay, so it's not just saying you believe something, it's having skin in the game for that belief.
Exactly, skin in the game. And this is crucial because Taleb argues it highlights a huge flaw in how we often think about ethics today.
Which is?
He argues that in many parts of modern life, we've kind of replaced genuine ethics, where you personally stand by your actions and face consequences, with legalese.
So ethics becomes less about, is this right, and more about, is this technically legal?
That's the danger. It shifts from a moral compass to navigating a rule book. And rule books, well, they can often be gamed, can't they?
Yeah, with a clever lawyer or, creative accounting, you can follow the letter of the law while completely violating its spirit or avoiding any real downside.
Precisely. And that's where trust starts to just evaporate. Taleb calls this arbitrage. Or even more sharply, the theft of anti-fragility.
Theft of anti-fragility. Let's unpack that. Anti-fragility is about systems getting stronger from stress, right?
Correct. Systems that benefit from shocks and volatility. So imagine you're a leader, maybe a CEO. You operate within rules that let you take huge risks. If they pay off, you profit immensely.
Okay.
But if they blow up, well, maybe the government, the taxpayer, steps in to bail out the system. You've effectively pushed the negative consequences onto others.
So you get the upside, they get the downside. You've stolen the system's ability to learn and strengthen from that failure because you insulated yourself from the pain.
You got it. You walk away relatively unscathed, maybe even richer, while the public or the system absorbs the shock.
And people see that. They see that massive disconnect between the leader's actions and the consequences they face.
Absolutely. And that destroys moral authority.
Mm-hmm.
How can you ask your team or the public to make sacrifices or take risks when you yourself are operating outside that risk pool?
Your words just ring hollow at that point.
Completely hollow. Which brings us straight to Stephen Covey. He argues that the real foundation of influence isn't what we say or even the superficial things we do. It's what we are. our character.
That's the core of his character ethic, isn't it? As opposed to the personality ethic of just techniques and charisma.
Exactly. Covey built his whole framework around this. He talks about needing dominion over self.
Dominion over self, meaning self-control, self-mastery.
Yes, self-discipline, being able to govern yourself, your impulses, your reactions. He calls this achieving the private victory.
The private victory. And why is that private part so important?
Because, Covey insists, this internal self-mastery must come before you can have genuine success in your relationships with others, which he calls the public victory.
So you can't fake it till you make it, essentially.
Not sustainably. People eventually see through it. If your communication or actions come from just techniques or trying to manipulate perceptions, rather than from a solid inner core of integrity, people sense that duplicity.
You might get compliance in the short term, maybe.
Maybe. But you won't get commitment. You won't build the deep trust needed for truly effective teamwork or leadership. The foundation is just too weak.
Okay, but how does focusing inward on this dominion over self actually build trust with, say, external stakeholders? They're looking at the organization's results, aren't they? Not just whether the leader is, personally disciplined.
He connects through integrity and self-reliance, which have very real external consequences. Think about it. If you haven't achieved that private victory, if you lack self-mastery, you become dependent.
Dependent on what?
On external validation, on others to cover your weaknesses, maybe on manipulating situations to look good. Ralph Waldo Emerson had a really profound insight on this. He observed that the borrower runs in his own debt, and he said the highest price you can pay for something is to ask for it.
Just asking is the highest price. Why? That seems counterintuitive.
Because the act of asking, Emerson argued, immediately sets up a relationship of superiority and inferiority. The moment you have to ask for help, whether it's money, support, a favor to cover a mistake, you're acknowledging a lack in yourself.
So you're instantly in a weaker position.
Right. You've created this relational debt. And that impacts how others perceive your worth, your capability, and ultimately your ability to lead and influence from a position of strength.
So building that internal dominion first means you operate from a place of self-reliance, reducing that need to borrow credibility or support.
Exactly. You establish your worth internally, so you're not constantly seeking it externally or creating those dependencies.
We've seen the devastating public consequences when there's a gap between that internal state or the facts and the external statements of leaders. The Vietnam War era comes to mind.
Oh, absolutely. That's a classic, tragic example. The American public's faith was shattered when leaders, like Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, kept insisting the war was going well, that success was achievable, maybe even imminent.
While the facts on the ground, the casualty figures, the internal reports painted a drastically different picture.
Right. There was this huge disconnect. McNamara's public statements were projecting confidence, control.
But they lacked that doxastic commitment we talked about earlier, the willingness to stand by the truth, even at personal cost.
Precisely. The words didn't align with the reality that was becoming increasingly clear. And the result? A deep, prolonged erosion of trust in government, in institutions.
It took McNamara himself years, decades even, to publicly admit we were wrong, terribly wrong.
But by then, the damage to credibility was immense. It shows how critical that alignment between word and fact, or at least the honest pursuit of fact, really is.
This idea of relying on internal strength, on the truth as you understand it, connects interestingly to Machiavelli, doesn't it? His advice about armies.
It does, surprisingly well. Machiavelli advised a prince to rely on his own arms, his own loyal soldiers, rather than depending on mercenaries or auxiliaries, which are troops borrowed from another power.
Okay, mercenaries are hired guns, auxiliaries are borrowed allies. Why did he advise against them?
It's a powerful metaphor for leadership integrity today. Machiavelli thought it was actually better to lose with your own loyal troops than to win using borrowed forces.
Better to lose, that seems extreme.
His reasoning was about the type of danger each presented. With mercenaries, the biggest danger is dastardly cowardice, faithlessness. They might just run away or betray you if the price is right.
Okay, unreliable. What about auxiliaries? They're often capable soldiers.
That's the problem. With auxiliaries, Machiavelli warned, the danger is their valor. If they win the battle for you, they are powerful, organized, and right there in your territory. They could easily decide to become your new masters.
So relying on external forces creates different kinds of vulnerabilities. One is about reliability, the other is about control.
Exactly. So relying on your own arms translates to leadership as build your own team's loyalty, Foster a commitment based on belief in you and the mission, not just a paycheck or some external pressure.
Operate from intrinsic strength, from genuine internal capacity and commitment.
Right, it's the polar opposite of trying to constantly leverage borrowed influence or spin facts to look good, which is like using mercenaries of truth. It's not sustainable.
Let's bring in one more perspective on this personal commitment from the ancient world. Cicero. He talked about the duties of leaders, especially in chaotic times.
Yes, Cicero framed this as a moral imperative for public figures. He argued that duties arising from our social connections specifically, caring for the well-being of humankind, should actually take precedence over purely intellectual pursuits like contemplation or knowledge-seeking for its own sake.
So action focused on public good trumps solitary thought. Why?
For Cicero, knowledge and contemplation were ultimately incomplete, even defective, unless they resulted in some concrete, beneficial action in the world.
The value is in the application.
Absolutely. He said in times of disorder, the great man's duty is clear. Act decisively. Act morally.
Yeah.
Punish the guilty, yes, but spare the many. And above all, maintain rectitude and honor.
So the intellectual honesty we started with, that private victory, it's not enough on its own. It has to culminate in visible, principled action that serves the community.
That's how true credibility is ultimately forged, according to Cicero. It's the marriage of inner integrity and outward action for the common good.
Okay, that sets a really high bar for the individual leader's character and commitment. But leaders don't operate in a vacuum. How do we translate that personal integrity into the organization itself? How do you build an institution for candor, especially in this post-truth climate?
That's the next massive challenge. And to even start tackling it, leaders need to get good at telling the difference between the surface-level problems and the deeper systemic issues. The authors of Crucial Conversations have a fantastic analogy for this. They talk about the dandelion root.
The dandelion root. We all know dandelions. How does the analogy work?
Well, the obvious problem, the thing you argue about, maybe it's a specific deadline miss or who gets which resource, that's the yellow flower head.
Yeah.
It's visible, it's annoying, and you can pluck it off fairly easily.
Right. You have the meeting. You resolve that specific issue for now.
But what happens a week later? Or a month?
The same argument pops up again, maybe slightly different details. The dandelion grows back.
Exactly, because you only dealt with the flower head. You didn't get to the root.
And the root represents
the underlying pattern or the process flaw or maybe a damaged relationship dynamic that's causing these surface conflicts to happen over and over again.
So if teams keep fighting over budget allocation, the real issue might not be the numbers themselves, but maybe a lack of trust between department heads or an unclear strategic direction.
Precisely. Or it could be something even deeper and harder to talk about, maybe subtle biases like racism or sexism embedded in processes or team dynamics that people are afraid to name.
So the first step towards organizational candor is actually internal candor. Leaders, and maybe the team, need to be honest with themselves about what the real problem is.
That's the prerequisite. You have to diagnose the root cause before you can possibly hope to address the recurring symptom effectively. You need to tell yourself the truth first.
This need for radical organizational candor reminds me of Ed Catmull's experiences, especially at Pixar, and then later trying to revitalize Disney animation.
Yes, Catmull is huge on this. He talks a lot about how traditional hierarchies can just stifle the truth needed for creativity. They block candor.
So?
He described the situation at Disney Animation before he and John Lasseter arrived. There were these hierarchical structures like an oversight group whose main job seemed to be constantly reviewing reports, demanding justifications, second-guessing the creative teams.
Sounds like layers of bureaucracy designed more for control than for fostering creativity.
That's exactly how it felt to the teams. It signaled a profound lack of trust. The system valued predictable compliance over the messy, uncertain process of discovery.
And constant oversight and reporting like that, Catmull found it actually eroded morale, didn't it?
Absolutely. Because the message was, we don't trust you to figure it out. Catmull says the most reliable sign that a creative project is genuinely in trouble, far more reliable than any status report, is when the director loses the confidence of the crew.
The crew, meaning the hundreds of people actually doing the work on the film.
Yeah, think about it. 300 people living and breathing this project every day. They know when it's working and when it's not, long before the executives do. They're the ones pushing that flywheel we'll talk about later.
So what happens when the crew loses confidence?
It's interesting. Catmull found a paradox. A director who can stand up and say, look, I know this scene isn't working. Honestly, I don't have the solution yet, but I'm working on it and I need your ideas. That director actually retains the crew's confidence.
So admitting uncertainty, but showing commitment to solving it, builds trust.
Yes, it's a huge deposit in the trust bank. The failures of the problem, the failure to acknowledge the failure or pretending it doesn't exist, that's what destroys trust and stalls progress.
So when Catmull and Lasseter took over at Disney Animation, they had to fundamentally change that communication culture.
They did. One of the key messages right from the start was that every employee needed to feel free to speak their mind to any colleague, regardless of their title or position, without fear of punishment or retribution.
That's a huge cultural shift. It's basically building the organizational structure for candor, allowing truth to flow sideways and upwards, not just downwards.
Exactly. It's creating psychological safety for honesty.
Now, this idea of candor gets really tricky when you're dealing with decisions under high uncertainty, which is, let's face it, most significant leadership decisions.
It does. Robert Greenleaf wrote about this tension, this anxiety inherent in decision-making when you don't have all the facts.
What's the core anxiety?
It's a balancing act. On one hand, you have the anxiety of waiting too long, trying to gather all the information, maybe missing the window of opportunity. On the other hand, you have the anxiety of acting too soon, making a critical call with insufficient information, which, as Greenleaf points out, is usually the reality.
And that balancing act got even more intense in situations like the military task force in Iraq, didn't it? They didn't have too little information, they arguably had too much.
That's a fascinating case study. They had access to an unprecedented amount of real-time data drone feeds, satellite imagery, reports from the ground, signals intelligence, more than any military force in history.
You'd think that would lead to better, faster decisions.
Paradoxically, it often didn't. The sheer volume of information tempted senior leaders to try and tighten their grip, to micromanage the battlefield from headquarters, believing they could somehow control all the variables they were seeing on their screens.
So information overload led to centralization.
In many cases, yes. And this attempt to control everything actually hampered the adaptability of the units on the ground. It created rigidity in the system.
And the enemy, AQI, they exploited that.
They learned to. They operated in the gaps, the seams created by this information-rich, but often slow and cumbersome centralized decision-making structure. The U.S. system sometimes prioritized top-down control over enabling fast, decentralized initiative.
So more data doesn't automatically mean more truth or better decisions. It can even be paralyzing or lead you down the wrong path.
It absolutely can, which is why Daniel Kahneman's work on cognitive biases is so relevant here. He talks about the importance of using the outside view.
The outside view. Can you define that clearly for us?
Sure. The outside view means making judgments or forecasts based on statistical information from similar past situations, looking at the base rates, the broad data.
Okay, like looking at the historical success rate of projects like the one you're considering.
Exactly. The inside view, by contrast, is when you focus on the specific details and narrative of your current unique situation. You focus on your talented team, your unique market insight, why this time it's different.
And we humans, we tend to prefer the inside view, don't we? Our own story feels more compelling.
Overwhelmingly so. Kahneman himself notes that people often find the statistical information at the outside view kind of pallid and unconvincing compared to a vivid, specific narrative. We're wired for stories.
But genuine transparency, real intellectual honesty and leadership requires fighting that bias.
It requires actively seeking out and giving weight to that outside view, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it contradicts the optimistic story you want to believe about your specific project or situation. It's about grounding your decisions in broader evidence, not just your own hopes or internal narrative. #3. The necessity of consistent, principled action.
Okay, so we've covered the leader's personal character, that need for honesty and skin in the game. And we've talked about building organizational transparency, fighting biases, and facing the truth, even when it's hard. What's the third crucial piece for leading in this post-truth world?
It's consistency. It's about the steady, relentless application of principled action over time. Jim Collins provides a powerful model for this in his work on organizational transformation.
You're talking about the flywheel and the doom loop.
Exactly. Collins studied companies that made the leap from good to great results, and he found a pattern. From the outside, their eventual success often looked sudden, revolutionary, like an overnight transformation.
But internally,
the people involved described it very differently. They said it felt like pushing a giant, heavy flywheel.
explain the flywheel image.
Imagine a massive metal disc mounted horizontally. Getting it to move takes incredible effort. The first push barely nudges it, the second, the third. It's slow, difficult, unglamorous work.
You're putting in huge effort for almost no visible result initially.
Right, but you keep pushing consistently in the same direction. And gradually, turn by painful turn, the flywheel starts to build momentum.
And eventually?
Eventually, it reaches a point where the momentum itself starts working for you. The flywheel's own weight helps it spin faster and faster until breakthrough. It's spinning with unstoppable force. But that breakthrough wasn't one single push. It was the cumulative effect of all the consistent effort that came before.
So good to great isn't about finding a miracle program or a single brilliant insight. It's about persistent, disciplined action accumulating over time.
That's the core finding. And the flip side, the pattern of failure, Collins calls the doom loop.
The doom loop, what characterizes that?
Companies in the doom loop try to skip the hard work, the slow buildup of the flywheel. They want immediate, dramatic results. So they launch a bold new program, then abandon it when it doesn't produce miracles overnight.
They lurch from one initiative to the next. A new CEO, a big acquisition, a dramatic restructuring.
Exactly. Lurching back and forth, reacting to disappointing results with more dramatic but ultimately inconsistent actions. They fail not for lack of effort or ambition, but for lack of consistency. They never build that crucial momentum because they keep changing direction.
This power of consistent, determined action isn't just organizational, is it? We see it on a deeply personal level, too.
Absolutely. Think about Frederick Douglass's account of his fight with Edward Covey, the notorious slave breaker.
Right. Covey's job was to break the spirit of enslaved people. Douglass had endured months of brutal treatment.
He had. But then he reached a point where he resolved internally that he would not be whipped again without fighting back. He made a proactive commitment to resist.
And when Covey tried to tie him up for another beating?
Douglass fought back, fiercely. He wrote, "My resistance was so entirely unexpected that Covey seemed taken all aback. He trembled like a leaf." They fought for nearly 2 hours.
And Douglass wasn't broken. That single act changed the dynamic.
Completely. It wasn't just a physical act. It was the culmination of an internal decision, a proactive choice to assert his humanity, his will. It fundamentally altered the relationship, and Covey barely touched him again. It shows the immense power of deciding to act consistently on a core principle.
That connects very strongly to Viktor Frankl's ideas from man's search for meaning, doesn't it? Even in the concentration camps, he realized that the one thing that couldn't be taken away was the freedom to choose one's attitude, one's response to suffering.
Yes, that last of the human freedoms. It's the ultimate expression of proactivity, choosing your response regardless of the external circumstances.
And Stephen Covey brings this idea right down to the everyday. He argues that we practice and build this muscle of proactivity not just in huge dramatic moments, but in ordinary life.
Exactly. It's how you handle a frustrating traffic jam. Do you react with anger or respond with patience? It's about keeping the small promises you make to yourself and others. It's about choosing your response instead of being driven by impulse or conditions.
So that consistent daily practice of small principled actions is what builds the inner strength, the dominion over self that prepares you for the bigger challenges. It expands your freedom bit by bit.
That's Covey's argument. It's the accumulation, like pushing the flywheel.
It's fascinating how this theme of steadfastness, of consistent action within your current role, even appears in spiritual texts like the Bhagavad Gita. That seems like an unexpected source for leadership lessons.
It might seem so, but the connection is really quite profound when you look at leading with integrity. The Gita discusses how one achieves liberation or freedom from turmoil.
Okay.
And it specifically warns against trying to achieve this simply through theoretical knowledge alone, just learning concepts, or by artificially abandoning your prescribed duties.
Artificially abandoning duties. What does that mean in this context?
It cautions against suddenly giving up your work, your responsibilities in the world, to become, say, a renunciate or a yogi, just based on an intellectual idea, without having done the inner work.
So, translating that to a modern leadership context, prescribed duties could be your job, your role, your sphere of influence.
Exactly. The advice is essentially, don't just quit your job or your responsibilities impulsively because you read a book or had a sudden insight, thinking you can become an instant thought leader or find enlightenment elsewhere.
Instead,
the text suggests it's better to remain situated right where you are in your current position and strive to attain mastery and higher consciousness within that role, ideally under good guidance or training.
So true progress comes from consistent, dedicated work within your existing sphere, not necessarily from radical breaks or trying to artificially jump to a different state.
That's the interpretation. It reinforces that idea of consistent effort, of sticking with the work, of pushing your own flywheel rather than looking for a shortcut or an escape. Don't quit the work before it's done its work on you.
Okay, sticking with the military domain for a moment, we encounter a real tension around this idea of consistency, especially when it comes to transparency versus secrecy.
We do. On one hand, you have someone like Karl von Clausewitz writing about small war or guerrilla warfare.
What's his take?
He emphasizes that for smaller forces or resistance movements to be effective, they must engage in active defense. They have to fight, be visible, take action. Passive resistance isn't enough. He says nature doesn't conveniently create miniature fortresses for small detachments. You have to be proactive and engage.
Okay, so that sounds like consistent proactive effort again, aligns with the flywheel, with Douglas's resistance.
It does. But then you bring in Sun Tzu, the ancient Chinese strategist,
Mhm.
and he throws a major wrench into our theme of transparency and candor.
How so? Sun Tzu emphasizes deception, right?
Right to the extreme. He advises that a general must cultivate quietness to ensure secrecy. But more than that, he says a general must actively mystify his own officers and men with false reports and misleading appearances.
Deceive his own troops.
Yes. Keep them in total ignorance about the real plan, the real risks. Why? So that they only experience the positive outcome, the victory, and rejoice over their happy outcome without understanding the difficult path taken.
Wow. That is diametrically opposed to the Pixar model of radical candor, or Covey's emphasis on open communication based on character.
It's a stark contrast. In one model, trust is built by sharing the truth, even the ugly parts, like the Pixar director admitting they don't have the answer. In Sun Tzu's model, trust, or at least obedience and effectiveness, is maintained by withholding truth from your own people for strategic advantage.
So how do we reconcile this? Is transparency always the right answer? Or are there contexts where strategic deception, even internally, is necessary for leadership?
It forces us to think about the purpose of the trust and the nature of the environment. If your goal is long-term creative collaboration, innovation, building a learning organization, then candor seems essential. It's the lifeblood.
Like Pixar making a movie.
Exactly. But if your primary goal is short-term survival in a high-stakes, zero-sum conflict against an intelligent adversary, where information linkage could be catastrophic,
Like Sun Tzu's general on the battlefield.
then maybe strategic opacity, controlling the information flow even internally, becomes a necessary, albeit uncomfortable, tool for the survival of the group. The consistent action in that context might be adhering to a strategy of secrecy, not openness.
So the consistency lies in the unwavering application of the chosen strategy, whether that strategy demands openness or demands secrecy based on the context and objective.
That seems to be the difficult synthesis, yes. The leader must be consistent in applying the appropriate tool for the specific situation, even if those tools seem contradictory across different contexts. Hashtag Tagilla Forbet. Final lessons in leadership and knowledge.
This tension between openness and control, certainty and uncertainty, brings us to some final thoughts on how leaders navigate the future and build alignment. Ed Catmull at Pixar pushes back hard against a common myth, doesn't he?
He really does. He hates the lone visionary myth, this romantic notion that great creative breakthroughs spring fully formed from the mind of a single genius leader in a flash of insight.
Like Steve Jobs pulling the iPhone out of thin air.
Right. Catmull says that's just not how it actually works, especially in complex creative fields like filmmaking or technology development.
So what's the reality?
The reality is that creative people and creative leaders discover and shape their visions over time through a lot of hard work, collaboration, and often protracted struggle. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
You can't possibly know exactly what the final product or the future market will look like years down the road.
Absolutely not. Because as Alan Kay famously said, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. It doesn't exist yet.
So the leader's job isn't to have a crystal ball.
No. According to Catmull, the leader's real job is to rely on guiding principles, clear goals, and most importantly, to foster the optimal conditions for that unpredictable future to emerge and be shaped by the team.
Creating the environment for invention rather than predicting the invention itself.
Precisely. Real confidence, Catmull argues, especially when you're trying to do something genuinely new, isn't about knowing exactly what to do at every step. It's having the deep-seated confidence that together we will figure it out, despite the inevitable setbacks and wrong turns.
That collective confidence, that we'll figure it out together attitude, seems like it would require tremendous alignment and focus across the organization.
It absolutely does. Which brings us to a very practical tool for achieving that alignment in a potentially chaotic environment. OKRs. Objectives and key results.
OKRs. They've become pretty popular in the tech world and beyond. How do they help specifically with communication and trust?
They function as a precision communication tool, especially when implemented well. They're more than just setting goals.
How are they different from traditional goal setting, like MBOs, management by objectives?
Key differences include their emphasis on transparency. Everyone's OKRs, from the CEO down, are typically public within the organization. They're often set on a shorter cadence, like quarterly. And they usually include stretch goals, ambitious targets that you might only have a 70% confidence of hitting.
So the transparency links everyone's work visibly to the bigger picture.
Exactly. It shows how individual or team efforts contribute directly to the organization's highest priorities. This clarity fosters accountability, sure, but also engagement. People understand the why behind their work.
And that clarity combats the ambiguity and uncertainty that can breed mistrust in a post-truth environment.
Precisely. It provides focus. And critically, like so many of these principles, it requires leadership modeling.
Meaning the leaders have to visibly use the system themselves?
Yes. It can't just be mandated from on high. People like Jeannie Kim at Nuna or the legendary coach Bill Campbell understood this deeply. Leaders have to publicly commit to their own OKRs and demonstrate the process.
You mentioned Larry Page at Google personally reviewing engineer OKRs early on.
Right. That wasn't about micromanagement. It was signaling. This process is fundamentally important to how we operate and how we succeed together. That modeling is what makes the system take root culturally.
There was an example from YouTube, wasn't there, where a team got a really tough, high-level OKR.
Yes. And because the OKR system made this objective public and critical, suddenly all eyes in the company were on that team. It wasn't about pressure in a negative way. It was about clarifying priorities across the organization and marshaling resources to help that team tackle the challenge. OKRs turned potential ambiguity into shared focus.
Okay, so let's try to tie this all together. We've journeyed from the need for personal integrity and risk-taking that doxastic commitment in the individual leader.
Through building organizations designed for candor, like needing the courage to find those dandelion roots, or creating environments like Pixar's Braintrust, where honest feedback flows.
And finally landed on the crucial role of consistent, principled action over time, the power of the flywheel effect. Whether that consistency is in open communication or, in specific contexts, even strategic secrecy, all align through tools like OKRs.
Maybe the central insight threading through all of this for leaders trying to operate now in this post-truth climate is this. Credibility isn't solely built on finding and proclaiming one single objective truth, because frankly, those universally accepted truths seem harder and harder to come by.
So if it's not about having the answer, what is it about?
It's increasingly about the process. It's about demonstrating the intellectual honesty, implementing the transparent mechanisms, and showing the sheer persistence required to pursue truth or the best possible understanding consistently and openly. It's earning trust through the integrity of your approach, turn by turn.
Which leads us perfectly into our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to maybe wrestle with. Ed Catmull makes this distinction between craft and art.
Right. Craft is the expected knowledge, the skills you need to do the job. Art is the unexpected use of that craft, doing something novel, taking a risk.
And Catmull warns that the desire to be safe, to avoid failure, often leads organizations towards just repeating the craft, leading to mediocrity. He calls it Frankensteining, just stitching together pieces of things that worked before.
So the question for you is this. If leadership itself involves a significant amount of craft managing budgets, setting strategy, communicating what is the art required today?
What unexpected art must you, as a leader or aspiring leader, introduce? What uncomfortable truth must you speak? What personal risk embodying that doxastic commitment must you take?
What choices do you need to make to break free from the safe, predictable, craft-based decisions that might feel secure but are almost guaranteed to fall short in navigating the complexities, the risks, and the fundamental challenges of truth in our current environment? What is the necessary art of your leadership?